Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Cannane. Coming up, why medical miracles are still the only sure path to Catholic sainthood, a former state premier's idea to recruit government ministers from outside politics, and would you take advice on what to wear from Shane Warne? Our panel tonight, ABC Online Chief Political Writer Annabel Crabb, David Marr from the Sydney Morning Herald, and Tim Wilson from the Institute of Public Affairs. First, there's rising anger among farming communities in the Murray-Darling Basin over proposed cuts to water allocations. The latest town to vent its fury is Griffith, where a public meeting was held today to explain why cuts to water licences are necessary to preserve the Murray-Darling. Representatives from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority copped some pretty hostile questioning today, but federal independent MP Tony Windsor says everyone should take a deep breath.
There's a lot of consultation, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of economic and socio-economic work to be done, and I think objectivity and common sense will actually deliver a far better outcome than outrage, shock and fear.
Today the government acknowledged there's a problem, announcing a parliamentary inquiry into the Murray-Darling Basin plan to be conducted by the new Regional Development Committee.
A lot of competing issues that have to be balanced here, but all of my experience shows me that that will only happen if there is active engagement by the stakeholders, fully informed about the options, the alternatives, clearly the challenge, but also the opportunities going forward.
Annabel, the announcement of this parliamentary inquiry, purely down to the noise coming from farming communities?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that what became clear pretty quickly over the last week is that this is the stage of the water reform process where details start to emerge, and that draft report doesn't give farmers and irrigators exact answers about what will happen to them, but it gives them kind of a pretty big sniff that this is serious and it's happening. I think for a while the water reform process was kind of comfortingly mired in that deadening coag language that we hear when they all get together and put out these communiques that run to 6 pages and not a single paragraph of which can be understood by a normal sentient human. Now it's actually having some effects, and I think that the big upset on the part of farmers and irrigators when the report was released was that there was no inclusion in the report of a consideration of what would be done for or how these communities that would be affected would suffer. There was no attempt to quantify, you know, what would happen to those communities, and I think that this is the government trying to fill that gap, because like in a reform process that's hard, and I don't think in this country we've seen anything analogous since the tariff reforms, you're asking communities to deal with some quite significant personal hardship in the interests of the broader community, and at the very least those people want to be heard.
And those tariff reforms are often related to city work too, where it's easy to suddenly find new jobs, but in the country it's very difficult, isn't it, David? These communities have a right to feel fairly angry, don't they?
Well, yeah, they do. And they are, of course. There's a whole cohort of journalists who have been reporting the Murray-Darling Basin for a long time, and I've been talking to them in the last few days, and what they tell me is this: that is one of the most complicated stories imaginable. One of them said to me, it's like the Middle East. You think you've grasped it, and then you hear something, you learn something else, and your grasp completely disappears. But there's one thing that's clear. At every community along the river, there is the same feeling, that the people responsible are upstream and they're highly sceptical of the needs of water downstream. They're sure of their own position and sceptical of everybody else's. And sure, they're upset, and it's really tough. This is tough reform. But on the other hand, it's got to happen.
And we're seeing pictures here from Griffith and some of the graffiti and some of the signs. All those shops were closed today so people could attend that rally. 1,500 people were in the venue itself, a few thousand under tarpaulins outside apparently. And some pretty interesting graffiti there, Tim, including one that said Penny Wong is dead. And she's not even the water minister anymore.
No, I think that probably refers to the fact that a lot of the justification about doing water reform has come as a consequence of the climate change debate, which she was central to in the last parliament. So I think there's obviously some sentiment from there. But I did want to pick up on Annabel's point.
She was responsible for water.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things about the trade debate and the tariff debate was at the end of it, there was only economic benefit to liberalisation and reform. Yes, you needed to deal with consequences, but it was basically vested interest versus public interest, whereas this one is going to be hard and tough no matter what happens, and it's only going to cost people.
Although it does, end up in Australia continuing to have Adelaide, presumably.
Well, I think I'm not arguing with that. I'm just saying that it's going to be cost here, benefit here, whereas tariff reform, ultimately, the benefit was to everybody.
Yeah, but it wasn't immediate. It wasn't immediate. There was a lot of pain for communities in the interim.
And there needs to be good structural adjustment, and that's where the government is going to have to focus its energies. But with relation to the posters, I mean, the government's completely lost control of this debate at this point. Framing in a public debate for a government to sell a proposal and to actually get what it wants requires good framing. At this point, the only framing of this debate is a noose, and it's being put around Tony Burke's head. And one of the reasons they've got Tony Windsor brought him in is to try and remove responsibility away from the government and give somebody else the chance, because they're trying to deflect the responsibility. Because at this point, you'd have to say that the reform proposal is going to have an almost impossible uphill battle.
But how do you do this in a way that's not messy? I mean, we've seen governments kind of messing around with this for years and agreeing in principle that something... I mean, you can't argue, unfortunately, with the intractable facts at hand, that there's not enough water, so...
Well, this is where we can learn from the tariff debate, I think, which is there is a property right there with water allocations. The only way the government is going to be able to succeed in this is if they spend a lot of money compensating, purchasing back those waters, which they're already doing, but they're obviously going to have to go a lot further. And that money can then be used for structural adjustment in those communities to find other avenues, whether it's, Tony Windsor was talking about water efficiency, water saving measures, which can either increase the technology so they can continue on doing what they're doing or find new industry.
Annabel, is it easier for Labor to do this? There's no Labor seats along the Murray-Darling Basin. I mean, it'd be harder for the coalition to do this, wouldn't it?
Yeah, certainly, and I think that if you define political courage as the preparedness to take on your own constituency, which is kind of what happened in the tariff reform era for Hawke and Keating, they were their own voters overwhelmingly that were being targeted. I think that there's certainly definitely a regional urban divide here on water usage. But then also, I mean, you've got one city in particular that's affected in Adelaide, and everyone in Adelaide is affected by this issue, and I think that it has a political significance in Adelaide that it has nowhere else in Australia.
Sorry, David, you want to make a point?
I was just going to say that if the story that is generated from all of this is a kind of Labor destroys the heartland story, that'll be very, very damaging for it across Australia. Not just there, but on the other hand, if they have the courage to see it through, it's going to be another one of those. It's going to be another thing that Labor can say we did the fundamental building blocks of the federation. So it's great courage to take it on.
Can I say, though, at this point, I don't think we see any signs of the Labor government genuinely being prepared to take it on. I mean, they've already buck passed Tony Windsor. They're already trying to deflect the fact that it's going to have a huge... This is already a very demonstrated...
Windsor to write the thing. I mean, they just...
No, but they're trying to shift responsibility and shift focus already because they know how toxic it is. Because you're right, it is a big reform agenda, but it's going to have a big impact on cities.
Tim, it's really early days. We're about 4 days in.
I agree, but that demonstrates further how little courage they have.
But Tony Windsor
because the price of food will go up. It's going to be a big public policy.
But Tony Windsor is saying today he doesn't think that it's going to see the light of day, that Murray-Darling Basin Authority plan.
I'm not disagreeing with you. It shows you, again, just how much they're trying to deflect responsibility.
We're talking here about an issue where Australia has shown remarkable lack of courage since before Federation. There was a plan before Federation that control of the Murray-Darling would be given to the Commonwealth as the only way of seeing this river system properly managed. And in the end, they balked, and the states wouldn't allow that power to be handed to the Commonwealth. This problem is something like 130 years old. God knows, maybe they've got the courage now, but...
So, David, are there political opportunities here for Tony Abbott to exploit?
Oh, of course. You know, Mr. Wrecker, he can, be up and down the Murray-Darling rivers in a canoe, I would imagine. Canoeing down the river.
Well, Mr. Representative of regional electorates, I'd be surprised. I think it'd be a bit derelict of him if he didn't.
He'd be derelict if he couldn't, get some political advantage out of this. I mean, what does the river matter when you might get a few percentage points supporting the coalition? Damn the river. Oh, sorry, that's a bad pun.
A tad cynical.
Heavens, not cynical.
OK, well, as Catholics make the pilgrimage to the Vatican to witness the canonisation of Australia's first Catholic saint, Mary MacKillop, one of our panellists has rained on her parade. In a column in today's Sydney Morning Herald, David Marr dismissed miracles as rubbish and ridiculed the church for chopping and changing the rules surrounding qualification for sainthood. Now, David, if people believe in miracles, if it helps them get by, what's the harm?
Well, as scientifically controlled tests show, that if you trust in miracles and pray for the miracle cure of your families, your loved ones, and indeed yourself, the medical outcome is marginally worse than if you don't pray.
How much worse?
Oh, well, it's marginally worse, but there's certainly absolutely no demonstration that prayer helps anybody.
Is that because the sick person feels especially obliged to get better and is a bit stressed as a result?
That's one theory. Another theory is that believing that they now have heaven on their side, they forget to take their pills. There are many theories for it, but the fact of the matter is, if all they can show for 100 years, because Mary MacKillop has been dead now for 100 years, if all they can show for 100 years is 2 cancer remissions, she's not doing much heavy lifting in the miracle department.
So why did the other sort of miracles get weeded out? I mean, why is cancer remission a miracle and not, your keys turning up when you were definitely convinced that they were lost and other, more serious
say,
things?
Bringing world peace. Now, if somebody came along and was able to achieve world peace, that would not count as a miracle. Look, I think it's
Would you believe in a saint, though, that achieved world peace?
Well, I'd quite like to have one. But I think it's some weird kind of notion that miracles have to be scientifically provable. There's some kind of really odd sprocket going around in her head there. And so you've got to have these provable cancer remissions. Until 1983, heaven was under orders to provide three miracle cures. But since the reforms of 1983, 2 will do.
And there are some saints, aren't there, that did nothing more interesting than get eaten by packs of rabid dogs or something. I mean,
or be
the
great scholars, or bring civilization to the wilderness of Ireland. Get snakes out of Ireland.
This is a private institution. They're allowed to set their own rules and whatever. If they want to put people up to sainthood, they're more than entitled to do it. If they want to change their rules, why shouldn't they?
Oh, Tim, that's marvellous. That's the IPA view of the Roman Catholic Church. It's just a private institution that can set its own rules.
I don't want the state involved with it. But you obviously don't believe in it. Let people believe in what they want to believe.
I'm not saying people can't believe in what they believe. They can go on their knees to Rome. Actually, North Sydney is closer because that's where she's buried. They can do all of that, but I can at the same time laugh at it heartily.
Okay,
David, I want those people who would have
really
liked
say that
change in the Catholic Church.